recording, and I will share screen as well. So how fantastic, how fantastic. Okay, so thank you guys so much for coming to this AMA. The first thing I will talk about is we have this new system now, which changes the background art for the home page here, the landing page, and effectively speaking, what do I even mean to say here? It will change every day. We have it on daily on a 7-day rotation. So, effectively speaking, this will change every day. And I want to make it eventually so it's not synced up with 7 days, because I don't like, I kind of like to be out of sync with like a weekly rotation, as it were. But it is what it is. And we can just now skip past this, or we'll just go right back into here. So here we have this chart analysis. So you guys see that here there was, I guess, this was a downtrend that we saw was kind of catalyzed by a bunch of meeting taking place, right? And then it looks like here, this candle right here was a candle that was about an hour and 10 minutes after an epoch. So we know this was not really a post incantation sell. This was a this was not a post incantation sell. This was just somebody getting frustrated, and I think exiting. And I believe that was a sell here for about $31. Would you guys agree that was about $31? Do you guys see that? 31.04. You guys can hear me? Did I lose audio? Okay, fantastic. And then okay, you can't hear me. Thanks. I literally have no idea either way. Like it is kind of a what do I mean to say here? Yeah, I have no indication. Yeah, now also screen. Okay, fantastic. So this candle right here, which we saw, which had a tail here, was a $31 sell, which was a little bit interesting, because right here we had an incantation for $18. And we had a $31 sell. Looks like people bought it back up. Smart for them to do. And I think this right here was another incantation. Have to bounce back and forth to pop up screen. Oh, my screen sharing, you mean? See, that's good to know. That's good to know. To be honest, this is not the computer that I will kind of use for my more advanced and professional streaming, if that makes sense. So this computer that I kind of like do this screen sharing stuff off of right now, at least, is in fact, what am I going to say? It's in fact a little bit slower. It's a little bit more primitive than the computers that I will be streaming on in the near future. So it looks like here we had some buying action all the way up into another incantation, which was this candle right here, and you saw some sell-off right here, and people are buying back up again. And this is now a sell here at 444. I'm assuming, I don't know. This could be a sell from a bot, but I guess I don't really care. And now we have what? On PyroSwap, we have what, 47% EPR. Now, what's great here, I guess you could say, is that we now are looking at more current Pyro Phantom being staked. Sorry, I mean less. What I mean to say is we are seeing more of a correct amount being staked at this time. Does that make sense? Because the way this is supposed to work, by the way, is that the EPR and the APR, this is supposed to be challenging to think about how it actually will end up at. Does that make sense? So right now we've got 47% EPR on this current Pyro Phantom stake at 373. If I were to go check phantom scan for the mead address and actually see how much it is. I'm assuming it's like 170, 176. Okay, very nice, very nice. So first of all, I want to illustrate, I'm not scared of red candles because whenever a large red candle happens, like it immediately turns into good things that happen after that red candle. Does that make sense to you guys? So like I know that I have to just keep beating this to death, but do you guys understand that we have these scenarios that like, hey, red candles can be good if you know what to look for. And it looks like this, by the way. This is just volume that we're getting because of that upset, I guess, that $30 red candle. And maybe they were looking for something more or something less. Okay, so first of all, we have a higher number of total staked wallets. That's peculiar, but I guess I don't really need to look at this 176 anymore. We see that. Anyway, we see that the large people staking, I guess he's gone now. Yeah, he has now officially claimed and exited. And I mean, you know, I wish him well on his next endeavor. But yeah, there's a gigantic orange warning label. So yeah, I don't know how fucking sorry I should feel, because we did in fact include, by the time he exited, the docs were available. Like I know that was a fact. So he could have in fact read this, but he chose not to. You know, it is what it is. So let's see. Do you guys have any questions to start? Because I can talk about more stuff and can go into more perhaps advanced stuff here in a second. As you guys can see, we have another day of 8,000 volume. I would really like to see these numbers start becoming our low numbers as opposed to our high numbers, right? So, yep. Look at this Tomb Swap. Tomb Swap has 11K and we have 8K. So that's pretty good, I think. Does that make sense? I don't know if that's clear, but I think the fact that we're over 2/3 of what Tomb Swap's volume is right now, I look at that as a bullish indicator. Now, something else we can do, and just to be clear, you guys can hear me, is we can do a Genesis event for Pyre AVAX, Pyre BNB, and Pyre Phantom. Okay, did you adjust the summoning circle for the new liquidity? Rewards for the previous epoch were like 8 Pyre Phantom, but the 6-hour volume before was like 5K. So, it's possible. Electronic, it's possible, but also Electronic, I don't know if you're aware of this, but it is the TE trigger that first moves swap fees from regular LP into the summoning circle. And the reason why is it needs let's show you this transaction here actually. So it needs this transaction, and by the way, we now have more pairs feeding the summoning circle than before. So we actually had a few disabled when we were troubleshooting. So I want you to know that now, this week, we're finally firing on all cylinders. So up till now, we really weren't firing on all cylinders, by the way. So do you see that this transaction about 5 hours and 10 minutes ago, this remove, do you see this Electronic? Yeah, okay, so it's actually the remove transaction that causes the fees from this pair to actually enter the summoning circle. So then it sits in the summoning circle and it waits for 6 hours. So one of the ways that you can make it enter the summoning circle early is if liquidity is removed before then. Does that make sense? So the thing that works here is the TE trigger that first moves swap fees from regular LP in the summoning circle. The reason why is it needs a remove liquidity event to happen. So this remove liquidity can happen from anyone removing liquidity. But the way that it's guaranteed to happen, the way that it is ensured it will happen, is that the TE button will also do it. Does that make sense? So, yes, it is in fact done over a few epochs. So first you have a remove liquidity event. If nobody else removes liquidity, then you're waiting for the transpire epoch button to do it. So the first thing that happens is remove liquidity has to happen, and then that LP is now in the summoning circle. So inside the circle, it also collects yield as swap fees. Does that make sense? So the summoning circle itself, is also its own little liquidity provider. Does that make sense? But then on next TE, transpiration of epoch, then 75% of it will be converted into Phantom and then Pyre Phantom, illiquid, and sent to the meet address where it waits for another TE to actually show up as incants. Does that make sense? So it's actually 12 hours. Yeah, like you're looking at 12 hours. At least 12 hours. Does that make sense? And then by the way, then it's 75%, which means more of those fees get sent later too. Does that make sense? It has like an echo effect. Does that make sense? Yes, exactly. Electronic, exactly. Yep. Yeah. And by the way, Electronic, I had to get a refresher on that myself, because it is in fact since we've started like closed beta, this is like the next version of the transpire epoch system. So it did get upgraded and or reconfigured, so it's a little bit different. Could one start to game the event when somebody cares about the swap event every epoch encountered? Yeah, absolutely, Pega. Yep. You can even short it if you want. Yeah. In fact, Pega, you're supposed to, because all of those counter trades also contribute to volume. Does that make sense? So believe it or not, right now we're in a very, very useful scenario. We're in a useful scenario, and that scenario is the fact that Pyre Phantom is shielded right now. So you'll notice, by the way, that as the price of Pyre Phantom dipped, it also seems to have at least taken the prices of 2-ohm and 3-ohm down a little bit, and even Z-ohm down a little bit. Does that make sense? Because Pyre Phantom is effectively what their line of support is, right? Or something near Pyre Phantom. It's really like Pyre Phantom and then whatever this tax kind of adds. So it's Pyre Phantom and then some difficulty, right? So you'll notice that these have now dipped down below 0.14, or I guess they're in this range yesterday too, but you'll notice that at least Z-ohm dipped down as well, which is fine because this volume is also what's going to feed Pyre Phantom's recovery. So right now we're looking at this chart right here, and we saw a downtrend. This downtrend right here was caused by meeting, which was happening here. Meeting was happening here because why? Because Pyre Phantom's price was going up. Does that make sense? So price was expanding. Supply was expanding by a lot. This caused an oversupply condition, which ended up with these red candles were contested, but then you had more people selling here, right? So as there's more supply and there hasn't been green candles to kind of create those red candles, you have to assume they came from meeting. So the source there is that it was either a buy pressure that happened at some point back there on 2-ohm, 3-ohm, or Z-ohm, or it was coins that were kind of issued in Genesis. But the thing is, like, I want you to see that now that we have this downtrend, you're going to see that it's probably going to start climbing up again. Why is it going to climb up again? Because first of all, let's look at this. Nobody who's staked in here that much has that much to sell. This guy right here, the number one staker, he has less than fucking 100, right? Does that make sense? So it was like the two largest stakers. I think one of them was at 600. I'm assuming that was the guy, right? That was the guy who was selling it all. And he's like, you know what? I'm just going to exit this because I don't understand it. And he exited, right? And the thing is, that is okay. Yeah, this is his candle right here. This is his candle right here, and it's okay. How do I see that indication? Hang on. How do you see the actual, like, what the fuck are they called? Well, that's certainly weird. Well, it only registers one liquidity provider here, but that seems like it's wrong, isn't it? Electronic, are you still a liquidity provider here? Well, no big deal. Anyway. So, now it says only one. Well, no big deal. Okay, well, I'm assuming that's an error. Yeah, anyway. Holders. Okay, well, this is Pyre Phantom holders. Top traders. Well, you have these traders, right? So this is the bought 64 and sold 151. Good for whoever this guy is, 8406. This is like the correct way to play. This guy also was in the fucking profit. You'll notice that some of these people, they weren't buyers. Isn't that interesting? But hey, bought 785 over 3 transactions and sold for 29. This is correct. Whoever these guys are, yeah, you guys are top traders. You guys are playing correctly. That's how it's supposed to look. I love that Deck Screener provides this, by the way. Anyway, so everybody who sold and they didn't buy, those are in fact meters, right? Does that make sense? So the point being is here, now that Pyre Phantom is shielded, you're going to kind of expect an uptrend because this guy right here has been holding for too long. This guy's been holding for too long to really create that much of a red candle, and I think everybody else knows how to play by now. Everybody else here who's kind of like long-term staked, they've got their positions fucking destroyed by now. Look at that. Look at this. Look at the amount staked, right? 373. First of all, I love to see it. I love to see like lower amounts staked because it means that we are in fact kind of arriving at the at literacy. We're arriving at literacy, and that's kind of what we kind of need to arrive at here. So I hope that answers your question, Electronic. And Pega said, could one start to game the event? Yes, Pega, and it's not gaming the event because the event is a game. Does that make sense? So 100% Pega, that right there is even masquerade trading, which is for the knighthood to do. So knights later on, when you're above 0.8 TWAP, there is no metatrage available. Would you agree? Because as soon as you go above 0.8, there's guards on the mead contracts. Does that make sense to you guys? So you can't mead for Pyre Phantom above 0.8. So how do you, as a Tomb Fork, get back to peg if you can't mead anymore? So believe it or not, you actually are going to trade using your peg coin and then in fact take profit back to your peg coin. And that's how you'll actually end up scalping, or should I say, that's how you'll end up, what am I going to say here? That is how you'll end up, climbing to peg, if that makes sense. And I'll go over that way later, Pega, when of course TWAPs are above 0.8, if that makes sense. Like I'll do more and more training on that stuff later. But anyway, I might go get another water real quick. But you guys, so I have been thinking about the fact that, again, we are in fact getting more players and they are trickling in, but everybody in DeFi, they like to see a launch with some panache, right? When you guys like to see a launch, you like to see with it at least a surge of activity. Would you guys agree that the chart should kind of always be moving during a launch, right? It's kind of cool that we have this really, really identifiable pattern here, and I'm glad that we spent now arguably 11 days to kind of trace this pattern out. I don't know about you guys, but I'm ready to kind of increase the level of, I'm ready to make it a harder hammer to swing with. And what I mean by that is we, for Pyre BNB, Pyre AVAX, and Pyre Phantom, we can actually do a Genesis event, okay? We can do a Genesis. Does that make sense to you guys? Yep, thank you. Do you guys understand what I mean by a Genesis? We can effectively create a bunch of pools, and for instance, on Phantom, we would talk about literally these are the pools we can create for Genesis. So what's cool about this is that the fucking sell pressure ends up bringing these coins up. Yeah, think about how cool this Genesis will be, right? Because so think about these three pairs being in Genesis, right? So, oh yeah, Pega, I fucking love it. Yeah. Those three pairs being in Genesis. So Pyre Phantom gets hyperinflated, by the way. You guys know how Genesis works, right? You guys know how Genesis works? Okay, indeed, yeah. I do love the remixes of the fucking emojis, by the way. Those are great. Yeah, Phil Collins band, exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what I was talking about. Yeah. But no. All right. So a Genesis is effectively just a farm that is, it's a farm, right? Like basically what you're doing is you create these pairs, right? 2 ohm, 3 ohm, the pairs that I just put in my above content. Yeah. For anybody who is not familiar with, you're taking those liquidity pairs and you're staking them into farm contracts. Does that make sense? And the farm contracts, you get a reward coin, which is what? It's going to be those same coins. So it's going to be Pyre Phantom. You're going to end up with Pyre Phantom getting emitted to you in a Genesis pool. Does that make sense to you guys? So believe it or not, this will in fact hyperinflate Pyre Phantom. However, amazing, what a great reference. This will in fact inflate Pyre Phantom, but at the same time, what are we getting in return? What are we getting in return for this potential hyperinflation of the meme coin? We're getting a shit ton of volume, correct, and we're also getting a shit ton of promotion and eyeballs. Would you guys agree? We're getting a shit ton of participants now and a bunch of people that are in this server that are actually paying attention to the AMAs. So you get what I'm saying? So we could in fact get, oh, for a Genesis, Pega? Yeah, okay, for a Genesis, it's straight up we're minting extra token and then fucking confetti spraying it across the fucking LPs. Yeah. So we are going to hyperinflate the token for like a few weeks. That is likely what we'll do. I haven't fucking committed yet to doing Genesis, by the way. Yeah, I'm not like 100% committed to doing Genesis, but it is an option of what we could do. Yeah, printing. We would just print a whole shit ton of it. Which would in fact, but again, you got to understand, we're printing it for pairs that you need that coin in. And then the fact of the matter is because we're also, because Pyre Phantom is getting dumped, right, for 2 ohm, 3 ohm, and Z ohm, what does this do? This ends up shielding Pyre Phantom in this price divergence. Does that make sense? And by the way, Genesis is a temporary thing. We would do it probably for less than a month. Does that make sense? So Pyre Phantom will stay shielded. Yep. Oh, printed peg Pyre. Okay. They'll all be okay. We probably won't do it for peg pairs. Yeah, like I don't think we need those in Genesis right now. Those will be pairs that might show up later in farms, like for actual farms. But in Genesis, we won't do peg pairs. We'll probably just do pairs with Pyre Phantom in it. Does that make sense? So if we were going to do with Genesis pools, the pairs would literally only be this. They would be like BTC gas, gas ETH, and then fucking probably ETH BTC, and then literally just like Pyre gas against BTC, Pyre gas against ETH, Pyre gas against gas, and then of course Pyre gas against peg 1. We'll call it like that. Peg 1, Pyre gas, peg 2, and Pyre gas, peg 3. Does that make sense? So the Genesis event would probably be just those 6 pairs. The smallest pairs, the ones that would the ones that would have the highest emissions are the last 3 here. Yeah, the bottom 3, literally emissions ranked from lightest to heaviest there. Oh, you stake LP, Doc. You stake those LP pairs. Right there. Yeah, in that list. You would get Pyre Phantom. So you don't get emitted LP. You get emitted the token by itself, a liquid, which you would then, if you had it like an auto compounder, you would sell that one token to buy both tokens to just compound into more liquidity. Now, what's interesting there is what is this doing? This is putting buy pressure on 2 ohm, 3 ohm, and Z ohm, and this is putting sell pressure on Pyre Phantom. Does that make sense to you guys? So we are in fact creating a bit of a divergence in the in the ratios. Does that make sense? Do you guys get what I'm saying? Like the TWAPs are going to possibly feel a pressure where they are they will diverge, at least potentially during Genesis. But the fact of the matter is what I am bullish on, what I am very, very bullish on, is that because of the IWV being in play, Pyre Phantom will also rise in price to chase the fucking peg coins. Does that make sense? Because Pyre Phantom is getting fed by the volume that we're getting in Genesis. Does that make sense to you guys? You guys get what I'm saying there? Oh yeah, electronic. We could just yeah. Oh, by the way, we will have the IWV on all three chains before we do this. We will have the fucking max swap buttons on all three chains when we do this. But yeah, electronic, it'll be fine. Electronic, yeah, I'm ready. So like, I want you to know, it'll be a few more weeks before you see this. But like, I now know this works. Does that make sense? Yes, exactly, Maddie. Yes, but the thing is, Maddie, meeting is kind of like a newer thing, to be honest, right? Does that make sense? And to be honest, we don't need meeting because we're going to get supply from the Genesis. Does that make sense? So normally, meeting is the way that you create more supply for Pyre Phantom, right? But you don't need meeting to happen if you're having a Genesis because you're minting supply. Does that make sense? Does that make sense to you guys? Yeah, so like effectively, the Genesis then ends. Does that make sense? The Genesis then ends, and then now, if we have an oversupply condition, still, what did we get? We got a bunch of fucking volume, and what did we get that volume from? We got it from all the tokens. So here's the best part: because we're making 2 ohm, 3 ohm, and Z ohm, we're also adding volume to them. What is that also going to add volume to? It's going to add volume to the share coin pairs. Does that make sense to you guys? Yeah, exactly. Meeting is good for burning, right, which is also useful. It's also useful, and to be honest, I already knew how a Genesis event works. Does that make sense? The beta test was for the purpose of beta testing meeting and beta testing the incantation witch vault. Does that make sense? Yes, correct, Maddie. Yep. Or in bonding. Yes, meeting or bonding. For the peg coins, at least, yeah. Pyre Phantom is a little bit different. It burns in decay and it burns in smoldering. So anyway, we might do a Genesis because a Genesis is like a guaranteed way to get a bunch of promo, a bunch of marketing. We would schedule the Genesis out a little bit. Does that make sense? So if I actually decide to do a Genesis, I would probably make it like 30 days from whenever I decide. And then we would make sure that we have everything in place. And then I would just do a bunch of YouTube shit for fucking 30 days. Does that make sense? So I would just go on YouTube anywhere I could for... yeah, I would just try to get as much YouTube appearance as I could for about 30 days, you know? And naturally, I think that because a lot of people have bags in these protocols, you know, that would be not that difficult to achieve. And I think just from kind of creating that Genesis event, I would put it on April clock and I would put it on the launch calendars and stuff. And then that way we would have this kind of like surge of volume. And let's put it this way, people playing in Genesis, they might not understand how the IWV works. Does that make sense? But the fact of the matter is they would now at least come to the Discord so that they would now start attending these AMAs. Does that make sense to you guys? Like we don't need fucking millions of investors to make this kind of really I don't even know. Yeah, I mean a lot of the coins are already on CoinGecko. Yeah. Yeah, and honestly, Maddie, I'll keep doing these AMAs during Genesis. Does that make sense? So I'll just be coming in to do AMAs, and I'll only be talking about the IWV. Does that make sense? So, like, people will be in here, and they'll be in here from Genesis, but then I'll be like, okay, so now we're going to talk about the Incantation Witch Vault and the correct way to play it. And then that way I can just be training a larger group. Does that make sense to you guys? So it's good that you guys now understand the game. So, like, it helps other investors feel that, like, oh, hey, by the way, this is something that other people actually play. Yeah, and you guys don't even need to shill it to them. Does that make sense? Like, you're just like, yeah, no, this is exactly how it works. But the point being is, right here, while we might see like a downtrend, like more and more of a downtrend in the price of the fucking token, effectively speaking, the Genesis does end. So the whole fucking goal is that by the time Genesis ends, what do I mean to say here? By the time Genesis ends, we have a larger group of people playing. Yeah, exactly, Maddie. Yeah, 100%. And then, of course, by the way, what are they doing during Genesis? Pyre Phantom is still decaying, and then, of course, it's smoldering a bunch, too. Does that make sense? Yeah, so like, yeah, I know that you guys are like, oh, I'm still worried. No, it's time to stop being worried, Electronic. Again, if I was able to prove it with this amount of people, and then literally, by the way, this is one guy selling for $30 and it's still like this amount of money, yeah, it'll be fine. Like, it'll be fine. Because like worst case scenario, even if this does go down to like 50% of its price because of hyperinflation, we're getting so much more volume from it. We're getting so much more volume and liquidity. We're getting liquidity from it too. So all three dexes will get more liquidity and volume. Oh yeah, but Alessio, nobody's gonna be meeting during Genesis anyway. Yeah, and by the way, we can just turn the meat tax off. Yeah. Oh, yeah, I guess, but like then also, shit, Alessio, if that's the case, then I would also just kind of remove the fucking, I would remove the fucking swap fees as well. Like, yeah, if I'm gonna get to that point, the meat tax is 3%, but it's not 3%. Okay, do you guys understand that it's not 3% of like the peg amount? It's 3% of what you're sending over. So like this 3%, you don't really notice it. Like, what I mean to say here is that let's see, right here, 0.645, or right now we have like a 1350 to 1380. Does that make sense? So if we did this number, 138 divided by 135, right? So like that is right there at the meat tax. Like that's right there. This is 2%. Yeah, so this is the like the amount of parallel. So the mead tax is like not even in the fucking hundreds place, at least at this fucking TWAP. So you think it makes it more difficult, but taking it off would not. Taking the mead tax off, all it would do was make 3 ohm right now, maybe 1.138 as well. Yeah, like that's not significant enough for me to feel like I should take this off, if that makes sense. If anything, Alessio, once people figure out that after Genesis the only way to get it is to mead, what will happen is the supply will contract. Eventually, these things will be more overpriced. Like it'll have a higher price because it'll contract up, and then people will start meeting again. Does that make sense? Like so, it'll just fucking people won't mead during Genesis. And by the way, like Alessio, in order for people to mead, they want to see the price move faster, and the way that the price moves faster is we have to have more volume. Does that make sense? Yeah, and by the way, like Alessio, above 0.8, you don't get any meeting. Yeah, meeting is like only a crutch. It's like it's like training wheels. Yeah, so, yeah. Yeah, but Alessio, it also decays. Yeah, so like that's guaranteed to happen. It's just a patience metric. Yeah, like the fact that it would have to wait 2 more epochs to get to the same price. 3% versus 1.6% times 2. Oh yeah, Maddie. And Maddie, the point being is it'll also just make this chart alive. Does that make sense? So once this chart is alive and the whole DEX is kind of alive with like actual volume, we will have a month-long Genesis. First of all, it'll be exciting because the Phantom ecosystem, let's be honest, let's look at Phantom real quick. The Phantom ecosystem is just not that exciting right now, okay? The number one coin in the last hour has moved 1.73%. Does that make sense? Even the crashes are like 2.7%. Does that make sense? So we could, in fact, we'll get on Dex Screener first. Does that make sense? Yeah, exactly, Alessio. The point is there's not going to be any meat opportunities. Yeah, there's not going to be any meat opportunities during Genesis either. Yeah. So the point being is people are not listening how to play this game, and the real problem is we don't have enough people playing this game. Does that make sense? So how do you solve the problem of people playing this game? It's not like, oh, how do I turn the meat contract? If I turn the meat tax off, that does not increase the amount of people playing this game. That does turn into a little bit more volume, but it makes more sense to see actual movement on this coin. It makes sense to see actual movement on Pyre Phantom. And then when this coin starts actually tracking and moving, yeah, exactly. So you give them Pyre Phantom to learn how to play the game. Does that make sense? And then once they learn how to play the game, they'll figure out how to capture their own yield. And then later on, we'll be like, hey, Genesis is over after 30 days. And then people will still be playing because they'll still figure out how to capture yield with Pyre Phantom. And by the way, The best thing about Genesis, by the way, is we're going to get investors that aren't Tomb Fork investors. Does that make sense? So, Tomb Fork investors, like you guys, are still sentimental to the boardroom. Does that make sense? So, in order for us to really have like a witch faction, we probably do want to attract investors that kind of don't either know Tomb Forks or they don't like Tomb Forks. In fact, we have a guy here in this server who I haven't seen in a while, but he basically, when he was hearing about this product, he's like, I don't ever want to touch Tomb Forks again, but I am very interested in the Witch game. So he hasn't even been to one of these yet, but like he was here in January at least. And the point being is we do want to diversify the amount of people we are engaging with. So I think the best way to do that is to have a Genesis event. At the end of Genesis, we'll still have a higher volume because more people will be playing the game. Yeah, because this actually does compound, Lesio. It just needs to be kickstarted. Yeah, because at that point, people will actually be trading the game as opposed to just me teaching 10 people to fucking stick in a fingernail at a time. Does that make sense? And if they do come in just to farm dump pirate, you know what they did? They deepened liquidity for me. Does that make sense? Yeah. Again, Alessio, I don't care about red candles. Like, why do you think red candles are bad? Yeah, like, I don't know why you guys are still stuck on this. Like, it's okay. Like, if they came in to dump Harmed Fire, that would be amazing. That would be so much volume. Yeah, like, we could literally soar. We could soar in prices and we'd have more fucking liquidity. Then, yeah, it's okay. It's okay. By the way, Alessio, it's not like it's not going to be like a 3-day Genesis like a Tomb Fork. It's a 30-day Genesis. Does that make sense? It's a 30-day Genesis. So the point being is we can even make it so that that we actually emit more later. Does that make sense? So, yeah, I don't even know how to describe that, but we can make it so it has like an inverse minting curve. So not like, oh, hey, get in early now, but rather, hey, we will in fact, I don't even know what the fuck I'm trying to say here. But yeah, not like, oh, hey, get in early now, but rather like we can make it so that the Genesis lasts for a long enough time where I have 30 days to teach people this game. Does that make sense? So if it's day 11, talk about here is I'm going to talk about the speculative left shift, which is in fact the velvet rope pattern, but with a little something extra. So you guys are familiar with this right here. And I think you guys are familiar with this image as well. And this is like this is what we do is this ABCDE right here. This is like a scenario analysis for what time you're at in between the incantations. And over here, this right here is this purple squiggle that's drawn on the velvet rope. This represents what a speculative left shift can look like. And effectively, whenever this happens, what it means is that whenever this happens, what it means is that Pyre Phantom was over speculated. Does that make sense? And this is not a bad thing. This is not a bad thing because it's also very exciting to see it on the chart. But I'm gonna actually show you guys that you can see that this over speculation thing happens. And over here, I'm gonna point out. I'm gonna zoom in. And first of all, can you guys see my screen? Can you guys actually see my screen? Can you hear me? Yeah. Yes. Okay, Doc, you can see my screen. Okay. Who else am I with here today? I realized that I announced this kind of late, but I want you guys to see it. Do you guys see these yellow lines that I drew on the chart? Can you guys see that on your side? Okay. So these yellow lines represent an incantation. Does that make sense? So right here, this is 12th of February at 12. This one right here is 12th of February, 1800. This one right here is 12th of February at 6. Okay, look at that. It's actually, I missed one. This one right here is another one. Okay. So that's actually, let me draw that in. Okay, perfect. So this one right here was at midnight. This one right here was at 6. This one right here is at 12. This one right here is all the way at 1800. And this one right here again at midnight. This one right here is at 6. This one right here is at 12. This one right here is at 1800. Does that make sense? So I missed one. I missed a small one right here. But other than that, these are the brass posts in the velvet rope pattern. Does that make sense to you guys? The ones with the yellow lines on top. Fantastic, fantastic. Okay, thank you for the emoji there. I appreciate all sensory feedback I can get on my end. Otherwise, I have no idea if I actually make sense to people. So you can see right here that this was actually one of the earliest incantations, and it was on the 12th of February at 12, at least my time locally, and then the next one here was at 1800 on that same day. And you can see that we had what happened? The pattern dipped, and then it spiked up, and then it went sideways for a little bit. So do you guys see the purple left shift right there? This is what a speculative left shift looks like. Does that make sense to you guys? And then you can see that when the incantation actually happens, it's like it's almost level with where the price was going to be at anyway. Does that make sense? It's like this right here was where the line of resistance was, at that time at least. Does that make sense? So over here, this is like, it automatically gets corrected. So the speculative left shift, as soon as it happens, it's like that's extra energy that was in the chart that needed to be vented off. Does that make sense? So as soon as you see all this energy kind of curve like that, it'll the next one will probably be pretty boring. So right here you can see 1800, and then we go all the way to midnight, and it's a very, very tame chart, right? That's like a tiniest little velvet rope pattern. But after that, we start getting energy back in the system. So then we have, I guess you could say, a true velvet rope pattern. Does that make sense? And then here, believe it or not, we end up with another small speculative left shift. Does that make sense? Like right here. This is another, like this right here is another version of the speculative, the purple. Do you guys see it? Here, right here, this 12 o'clock, this is what we're calling the incantation. Yep, thank you, Doc. I'm on, I guess, Doc and Lurkers. Thank you, Lurkers. Yes, oh, and Joel, by the way, Joel, I tend to use general chat during AMAs because I think that by doing them in the stage channel, we're kind of not including other people in the server, if that makes sense. I think that more people in this server deserve to see that stuff actually gets talked about in the server. Does that make sense? So, yeah, I'm just making, yeah. If this server was more boisterous, it would make more sense to seclude it to the stage channel. But yeah, right now, since during beta testing, we can use general chat because I think that's the best way for people to learn anyway. So, you know what's funny? People have no problem spending 6 hours a day reading general chat, but then they won't spend 20 minutes reading documentation. Does that make sense to you guys? And it's because general chat feels more like a conversation, right? It doesn't feel like you're getting talked at. Okay, so then we had February 12th. Yep, February, and you know what? It's not even a problem. Like that's why I do these AMAs. So having these AMAs where I have audience responding to me, it doesn't feel like I'm preaching a sermon if I have some sort of feedback from my audience, if that makes sense. So right here we have 12 o'clock, and believe it or not, all of this right here, this was all noise in the system in front of another incantation. So do you see this gigantic speculative left shift? Like we had the tiniest little dip. It actually came up a little bit more. Then it fucking went down. Then it mounted up again. Then it went down again. And then here was the incantation. And then like from all of this speculative energy, what do you always see after a gigantic speculative left shift? You see a very boring gap, right? So after the big, do you guys remember? So this was the first one. This was the first one right here, and then it was a very boring gap. Do you guys agree? Well, actually, right here we saw two of them in a row. But then right here, a very, very boring gap. Does everybody see it? Like, not a gap, but yeah, exactly. So if you have this amount of speculation, Doc, and you have this amount of speculation, the speculation corrects itself, meaning like after people play the chart that way, it ends up with a tamer round. You have a tamer epoch. Like it's just like, yep, we'll have a little bit here and a little bit there. And right up here, by the way, this is another speculative left shift where it kind of ended up here. It wasn't boring yet. Does that make sense? It wasn't boring yet. You had like another dip. In fact, by the way, this is 6. So this was 6 o'clock. We're having some strong dip action here, a bit of buyback, right? And then you still end up with another speculative left shift. But I just want to point out that speculative left shifts either come up with another speculative left shift that's bigger, you know, right? Or they correct to a very, very boring epoch, right? It's impossible to predict this every single time, but I want you guys to know that when you see these gigantic speculative left shifts, it does increase the chance of either it being more exciting next round. Like if you have a small speculative left shift, you might end up with a larger one next time. But then after that, you'll end up with a more boring round. This is what, 1800 here? Yeah, there you go. This one's kind of boring. Yep. Right? Because we saw gigantic speculative left shifts here. And then here we're just like, you know what, we'll just be tame. We'll be quiet. We'll be well behaved. But does that make sense to you guys? I wanted to just point out this pattern because this is another representation of the velvet rope pattern. Does that make sense? Like the velvet rope pattern gets mispredicted by the people playing it, and then it ends up getting a little bit overshot. But the point being is it still always reemerges. Does that make sense? And the reason I kind of had to introduce this purple squiggle idea is because I knew that people were not always going to see it every single time. Am I making sense to you guys? But anyway, I'm really glad that I put these yellow lines on the chart. Okay, thank you, Doc. So now we have drama in the Paraswap Kingdom, right? We've got a little bit of downtrend action here, and I want you guys to know the downtrend action was expected. And who here knows why the downtrend action was expected right after we had a shit ton of green candles? Right? We had this chunk of time where the fucking candles were getting bigger and bigger and bigger, right? But now we have a bit of a downtrend. And why was it expected that it was eventually going to show up? Well, not just that there was no support, but something when you have the price getting higher and higher for Pyre Phantom, what's most likely going to end up? Yes, exactly, Doc. Thank you. So as the price climbed higher and higher, and we were getting highs here of in the 7 and almost the 8 penny range, right? As arbitrage bots were effectively correcting that, eventually we got up to this point, and then suddenly we have a bunch of red candles, and then suddenly we're not even climbing that high, even though we're getting good volume, as it were. Suddenly we're going to have to do a sharp decrease in price. Why? It's because the peg coins were all getting burned here to mint Pyre Phantom, because Pyre Phantom was finally becoming more valuable. Does that make sense to you guys? Yep, thank you, Doc. Does that make sense, Seabiscuit? Because right here, if you look at the other, let's see if we can duplicate this. Let's go pull up 2 ohm. Yeah, a little bit of both. Seabiscuit. Yeah, like to be honest, it's just more likely to you're just more likely to see it because of supply surges. So I'll tell you this, you know, over meeting would be if somebody just like did a shit ton of money and they lost their fucking hat, as it were. Does that make sense? Like there was over meeting, right? Somebody meted like $30 and then somebody meted like fucking $20. Does that make sense? So suddenly there's just way more. It's a supply surge, but really the point being is it's whether you meet or whether you over meet, you'll likely end up into some kind of downtrend. Now, the severity of that downtrend, Seabiscuit, is going to be related. Yeah, exactly. It's like you don't know what epoch it's going to happen, but eventually you just know that if you're gonna roll the dice enough times, eventually you'll hit a 1. Does that make sense? Eventually you'll hit snake eyes. So that was basically guaranteed to happen in the future because we had an increase in supply of Pyre Phantom. Does that make sense? So it's okay. The important thing is that it's okay, and I want you guys to know that the severity of the downtrend, right? Here you guys can see we had 2 downtrends, right? We had 2 downtrends, right? But they weren't maybe as sharp as this one. Does that make sense? People were getting more and more bullish. So guess what happened? The ecosystem responded to this bullishness by effectively allowing people to mead profitably during some of these green candles. In fact, we can look back. 2 of them is now 5 cents, right? So 2 of them being at 5 cents, it was climbing as well back on the 14th, right? Or okay, the 14th was when? The 14th was here. Okay, so we're actually going far back here. Let's see 2 of them in recent times. So if we were looking at the 19th and we're looking at 5/9, right? What days were these? Hang on. This day was the 20th. Okay, so the 20th, the 19th, and the 19th. Mostly just the 19th. Okay, going from the 18th to the 20th, we had a very bullish range, okay? If we're looking at 2 of them at the same time, between the 18th and the 20th, right, we had, let's see if we can find it. Okay, right here, this is the mark right here, 18th right there, and then here we have it at the end. It's already here on the 20th. Does that make sense? Here's the 21st actually going to a downtrend. But effectively speaking, 2 of them was kind of just ranging. Like it's not 2 of them is not nearly as interesting of a price chart right now as it is as Pyre Phantom is, right? It's just kind of like meandering. It doesn't really know where it's going. But the point being is, at some point, you can probably assume it was right here. Do you guys see where the green candles were in a row? It was probably meetable right here in this range. Does that make sense? And by the way, that's between midnight on the 18th and noon on fucking and yeah, so sometime in the first day of the 19th, it's very likely that 2 of them was meted. Does that make sense to you guys? Because 2 of them was meted, and we know it was meted, and actually I think it was 3 of them too. Let me see if I can pull up the 3 of them chart. If we look at the 19th of the 3 ohm chart, let's see. 17th, 18th, 19th, right? So the same thing happens here. Right here in that same time zone. Do you guys see fucking 3 ohm? Like immediately they have like a little bit of green candles and some surging. I mean, granted, it was like obviously happening here as well. So like I know that that's a little bit hard to fucking see. But the point being is, if there's green candles on 3 ohm, it's very likely happening either because meeting is profitable or in metetrage is happening. Does that make sense? Now the thing is, after metetrage happens, it doesn't necessarily like stay happening. It kind of like halts the fucking coin, right? Now you can see here there was like a bunch of red candles, which could have happened for whatever fucking reason, right? Like I have no idea what's really going on here, other than the fact maybe investors don't really know how to read this chart now because they're not paying attention to Pyre Phantom. But right here in this exact same range, 3 ohm had these exact same little uptrends, these upticks, just like that, or wherever it was, the 19th. And effectively speaking, because Pyre Phantom takes a dip in price. Oh, by the way, if you've never seen, by the way, the background changes picture now. Did you guys know that? Did I tell you guys yet? Who's in the audience today? The background of the landing page now changes every day. So if you guys have not seen that before, you guys are encouraged to go to actualpyresalt.com, and you guys can see our fucking background art change. How exciting is that? Yeah. Well, it'll be every 7 days it'll be a rotation, as it were. Yeah, he's reading exactly that, Seabiscuit. Exactly, you nailed it. So when we go back to the mead, like, to be honest, when Pyre Phantom takes a tumble like that, what does it end up doing? It does end up dragging the price of the peg coins with it. Oh, electronic, it has to be across 3 chains. Does that make sense? So it is a subgraph that we need to build to make that happen. Yeah, so it is like we don't have that at all. We could make it like, okay, we could make it off of like Dex Screen or API. Does that make sense? But you know what we could also do? We could probably just get it like a DeFi Llama listing. You know what I'm saying? Like if we go to DeFi Llama, Yeah, exactly. So the thing is, that's what I mean, Maddie. So if we did it like separate per chain, you know, let's go to like Sushi Swap or whatever, right? So if you go to Sushi Swap, where the fuck is Sushi Swap? I don't even know. Okay, let's go to Avalanche maybe. The Sushi Swap show up here. Is Sushi even trying? Okay. If we go to Phantom, where the fuck is that one? Okay, so you can see here that like Sushi Swap is, I don't even know where the fuck it's at. But the point being is, if we did a Sushi, by the way, we will do a DeFi Llama listing. This would probably be the best way to find it because you can see Spooky Swap is on 2 chains, right? So if you look at Beefy Finance is on 25 chains. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like it's a little bit. Oh, Stargate's on 13 chains. You can read. Let's go to this. Let's go to Dex's. If I click Dex's like this, it goes to Dex categorization. You can see certain ones of these get branched down. So Balancer V2 is on 7 chains, right? So if I click Balancer V2, you can see that it has a TVL of 1 billion, but it's not exactly, yeah, you can see the TVL breakdown on the chain here on DeFi Llama. Does that make sense? So we could just get a DeFi Llama listing, if that makes sense. That'll be the fucking plan. I think on the landing page, we'll just kind of maintain those question marks for now. Yeah. Anyway, we'll have DeFi Llama too. Let me actually add that to my hit list. Okay. Anyway, so we do have a downtrend now, and the thing is, we could kind of expect a downtrend to kind of counterbalance an uptrend, right? It wasn't a real uptrend; like we were still kind of flat, but you could see that like the top part of the curve was definitely going up. Does that make sense? Like you could see from maybe here to here, that was an uptrend, and then here it's going to just kind of like just reverse order and go down this way. But here's the good news: that also corrects. Do you guys get it? By the way, look at our volume recently. Like, look at our volume. 12K again. I don't know who did it. It was literally 9,700 a few hours ago. So the goal is now, by the way, that this is like our average. This is like a low for us now. Does that make sense? Doc, do you remember me showing you that like back in, I don't know, 2.5 hours ago and it was 9K and now it's 12K? What's going on? Yeah. So the point being is we now have a lot more going for us. So I would expect to kind of see the system start compounding more aggressively and taking off. I know that I think is electronic here. I know I told you like it compounds super aggressively, and I want you to know that you should now start seeing that now. Does that make sense? For the first 10 days, we had a lot of things misconfigured. Does that make sense? But you should now actually begin to see compounding like visible to you. Does that make sense? And it's not always going to be linear, but you should see it, and it should in fact make the chart a bit more exciting. Now I have even more good news because I guess I'm probably going to do this. Like if we don't, it's very likely that we need to do this for Avalanche anyway. So I feel like I'll end up doing it for all 3 chains. And we're probably going to do a Genesis event for Pyre Phantom, Pyre BNB, and Pyre AVAX at the same time, okay? So we're going to do a Genesis event, and what this will do is this will, in fact, inflate the shit out of the fucking Pyre gas tokens. Does that make sense? It will inflate them, but it'll be a longer extended Genesis. It's 60 days long. I'm probably in the top 10 of tokenomics in like all of fucking DeFi, so I know how to. I have already thought extensively about the right way to schedule emissions over a Genesis period. And what do I really want from this Genesis? I want more people in this server. Does that make sense? That's all I want. Do you get what I'm saying? Because I don't really care about red candles on the chart. You know why? Because as you guys can see, no matter how many red candles happen, there's always a guarantee of green candles coming up next. Does that make sense? Do you guys get it now? Like even if there's downtrends, there's just always going to be green candles. Do you guys get what I'm saying? Because the fact of the matter is the time preference about this coin, it still makes sense to play. And do you guys know why it makes sense to play? Because we have something cool for us going, like these ridiculous goddamn fucking APRs. So when we do a Genesis event, guess what? We're going to make our volume go crazy. Does that make sense? We're going to make our volume go fucking crazy. It'll be higher. I bet you we can make it a lot higher. Yeah, I did. Yeah, I wouldn't have just pulled it out of my ass, man. Yeah. If I'm talking publicly about it, I'm probably already like completed the plan to do it. Does that make sense? Like I wouldn't just like float it out there. So I was showing diagrams about it a few hours ago internally in the circus. But again, I'm not 100% committed, but I probably have to anyway for Avalanche. So, like, let's put it this way. I really, really wanted to be able to brag that I did this without marketing and I did this without farms. But why the fuck would I do that, right? Like, why wouldn't I just kind of attack this on all fronts, right? I think it's cool that I can show you guys how literally with less than 30 or 40 players, I can make this pattern show up. Does that make sense? Like less than 50 people and this pattern shows up. And if this pattern shows up with 50 people, I want you to know something. It shows up with 5,000 too. Does that make sense to you guys? So, yes, exactly, Maddie, exactly. So, even if I inflate it by like, I don't know, $100,000 where it crashes fucking 90%, what's going to happen eventually? It'll just start climbing back up. And Maddie, I want you to know, we're gonna inflate it onto the utility pairs, meaning 2 ohm Pyre Phantom, 3 ohm Pyre Phantom, and Z ohm Pyre Phantom. So the meterage pairs, those are going to be the pairs that end up getting the most of the Genesis weight. Do you know what Genesis weight is? Like the weight of emissions in Genesis. They're gonna want those pools are gonna have the highest APR, and because of that, they're also going to see what? We're going to see buy pressure on 2 ohm, 3 ohm, and Z ohm. Does that make sense to you? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So half of the Pyre gas is getting sold to buy 2 ohm or 3 ohm or Z ohm, right? And because we're going to put a bunch of buy pressure on those coins, people are going to start trading those charts again. Does that make sense? And once they trade those charts, what other coins will be traded? The share coins. Would you agree? Yeah, exactly. So I think that doing a Genesis would, it's a crazy bet, but I think I'm correct. And I really wish we didn't need a Genesis. I really don't like doing it, but I have to think of it this way. I need to teach 100 people or more to play this game. What's the way that I can get over 100 people to show up to these AMAs is I can do a 60-day Genesis. Does that make sense? So, Maddie, today is day 11 of beta. Does that make sense? And Maddie, would you say that you now kind of understand the way to play the game? Like you're probably, in the top 1% of players, right? Like I know there's only 40 or 50 players, but you now feel pretty, you feel like I basically get it, right? You understand 80% of everything about it. So the point is, Maddie, you probably understood it 5 days ago, correct? Like probably around 5 days ago, you kind of got the grips, and now you're even getting better at it, right? Right. So if I have 60 days, and I have more, like maybe 100 people show up to these AMAs, I'm not going to talk about Genesis. I'm just going to talk about how to play this game. Because what's going to happen? People are going to stake in the Incantation Witchfall a shit ton, and we're just going to kind of usurp them for the first week and a half until people learn to not do that. Do you know what I mean? And that's fine because those will also be more red candles, but I don't care. Those people, very likely people will get their Genesis rewards, and they'll just bring them over here and they'll stake them. Do you know what I mean? I'm like, well, that's fine if they want to smolder their Genesis rewards. If they want to just take that on the chin, they can do that. but I have no idea how else I could do this other than putting a gigantic danger label here. Yeah, exactly. And as you've seen, even if Z-share sells, like even if you have a huge dump of Z-share, that ends up beneficial to Pyre Phantom. And then if Pyre Phantom ends up beneficial, because right now, guess what? We're trending down, but look at the EPR. Like, look at this EPR. This is insane EPR for a downtrend, right? So as you can see, the utility value of Pyre Phantom is so fucking high right now because it gives you access to crazy fucking yield like this. So what can you almost guarantee is going to happen? People are going to buy Pyre Phantom now, right? We got 30 minutes into the incantation. What's the price? Let's look at the Mead screen, right? Right, 0.134. Okay, so it's a little bit higher than 2 ohm and 3 ohm right now, right? But the thing is, goodness gracious, like you can see green candles are starting to form, right? So what does that mean? Like, here's that was 2 minutes ago somebody buying with $2. Makes sense to me. I'd fucking buy, right? I already have my fucking Pyre Phantom this time. Or sorry, that is if my wallet works. I swear, is Encrypt gonna fuck me over again? All right, let me log in here. Yeah, so the way that I look at it, Maddie, is we are gonna do a Genesis to compress the spring. Does that make sense to you guys? So we might even see for like the first 30 days, you might see the price go down, down, down. But at the same time, there's always gonna be green candles, so you never really know what's gonna fucking happen to that price. I've seen people during farms, like, do you guys remember like the orbital swap launch? They got a fucking inflationary shitcoin to like $30, and I'm like, holy fuck, this is a coin that's gonna fucking crash its face off, and they still kept it up above like $1 for fucking months, and I'm like, now we're under a penny, because I'm like, of course it's under a penny. That coin didn't have any purpose. This coin, Pyre Phantom, on its fucking on day one of Genesis, it already has a crazy utility. Does that make sense? So that is going to change the way things work. I will definitely expect that people during Genesis, they will stake a shit ton in here, and we will just be running tutorials on how to usurp until they fucking figure out to not do that. Does that make sense to you guys? You can expect Genesis to be at least 30 days away. Right now, I'm going to focus on finishing. First of all, we're going to get these buttons fixed, right? These buttons are going to get fixed. They're going to work and be connected. Then we're going to deploy the other chains. So we're going to deploy the other chains too. Does that make sense to you guys? Yep. So we're going to get this stuff on all chains. I want you to know, like, look at this. All right, let's look at the volume on Phantom, 12K. Okay. Now, what happens if I go into the URL here? Electronic, I would say it's very degen. Yeah, I would say that it's very fucking degen. That's the way I would describe it. Now, if I go to BSC and I go to the same DEX, do you guys see that on Binance you only have $127 of volume? Do you guys see this? So, you know, Binance needs more volume too. What can I do to drive the volume up on Binance? I can host a Genesis, right? If I go and I click here and I change this and I go to Avalanche, right? Avalanche has $200 right now, right? But the thing is, the volume isn't really consistent over there, and it's also not compounding. Does that make sense to you guys? Yeah, exactly, Maddie. Yeah, exactly. And Maddie, I'm okay with that, you know? I'm okay with that because I need volume. And by the way, the only place where Pyre Phantom and Pyre, you know, the only dexes that have the liquidity of this coin is our dex. Does that make sense? Yeah, so actually we have a little bit, like $5 over on Spooky Swap, but I don't care about that. Yeah. Anyway, do you guys have questions? And do you guys like I really like that I'm highlighting the fucking I like that I'm highlighting the incantations here now because I think with these yellow lines above them, it makes it that much easier to kind of see the pattern. I might later on I might do it for the whole fucking like remainder. I might just do that now while I'm talking to you guys. If you guys don't have a problem with it, I'll just keep doing that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and there'll be more pairs too. So like, we'll also do Pyre Phantom against BNB. We'll also do Pyre Phantom against Phantom. We'll also do Pyre Phantom against Bitcoin. We'll do Pyre Phantom against Ethereum, and we'll also do the fucking. We'll also do a few like little blue chip pairs just for the sake of fucking. More on that later. Yeah, more on that later. But yeah, we'll have that shit going. And by the way, what we'll do is we'll announce the Genesis like 30 days out, and then I'm gonna focus on for like a month, just trying to do 3 YouTube appearances a week. Does that make sense? So what I'll do is I'll do like 10 to 12 YouTube appearances to promote the Genesis, and then like I'll talk about the shit, and then I'll just keep doing these AMAs. People, more and more of them will file into this fucking Discord server, and then, we'll just have more of a viable way to compete. Does that make sense to you guys? Because, the Happening comes in fucking April, and people are going to be going, it would be very nice to have a Happening to do Genesis, through April, right? So, like, that would be really, really cool, because we don't care about red candles or green candles. They're all good to us. Oh, by the way, very, very likely that all 3 peg coins will peg in Genesis too. Does that make sense? Very, very likely that Genesis will bring all 3 peg coins to peg. So you might see the share coins go fucking crazy. Oh, yeah? Phenomenal. Okay, well, let's see. We got 36 minutes left. I know I already have my fucking Pyre Phantom ready to go. You know what's weird? I have 136.4 Pyre Phantom, and up here I have 13.64 Phantom. That's a bit confusing. Anyway, do you guys have questions? Who here has a question? And I'm in general chat if you guys aren't aware of this. I guess I'm just going to keep decorating this price chart. Yeah. See, this one's 18, and this one is 1809, and then here we have it. Okay. That was midnight. Then we have this one here at 6. Here's 604. 11:57, 11:58, 12. There we go. Yep. That wasn't what I wanted. That's wrong. What's going on here? That's 6:07. That's 6:06. What's going on here? Oh, that's 6 o'clock. Okay, this one's wrong. There we go, 12. People's learn to play. Usually is somebody stay. Currently I'm first one with my flogging, so you flog yourself. Okay. Second insiders meeting. Yeah, well, anyway, I just wanted to let you guys know that, like, if you guys are still like waiting for the fucking real excitement moment, like we can still fucking kind of like get that going at any moment. Also, the fact of the matter is, Yes, exactly. Yep. Absolutely electronic. Yep. That liquidity pair will be useful in Genesis. Yeah, you can fucking be the whale of Genesis, electronic. The Genesis whale known as electronic, 100%. Yep, I believe Dr. Mac also holds a bunch of liquidity as well. So yeah, that is 100% valid. Yep. This one here's another incantation. 1800 right here. Look at that. Very, very clear. Ew. That's wrong too. Come on. Do you guys have questions? I don't know what to talk about. Now you can kind of tell, like, when there's very little price action here, it's like, oh hey, the yield might have not been exciting for that part. To remember who the witch vault. Yeah, exactly. Yep. Exactly. 6, 8, 9, 10, 11. Hang on. Oh, is this it right here? Oh, what a nice candle. Another one right here. Very nice candle. 18, 14. Here we go. Oh, man. That one is trash. Percentage in IWV is percentage of what? Dollar value of staked gas. Okay, you mean this? You mean this APR here? APR, EPR, and DPR? Okay, it is actually direct quantity to direct quantity. So what that means is, let's go to the meet address here. So if you can see here, do you see that there's 175 Pyre Phantom? Do you see this right here? Where I'm looking on my screen, Maddie? Do you see where my mouse is pointing? It's a small, tiny number. Here, I'll screenshot it and paste it. Okay. For those of you guys who don't know, if you go to Phantom Scan, you go to this contract address. Here, I'll even highlight it for y'all right here. So this number right here, that number is sent. This amount